I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, China and the U.S., we have moved from a trade and tariff war to a currency war. Are we moving to a currency war, Alexander?
I think it's beginning to look this way. What has happened is that obviously Donald Trump imposed extra tariffs on the $300 billion of exports that China trades to the US, which had not been covered with tariffs up to now. And what then happened over the last couple of days is that the Chinese currency depreciated below a sensitive level, which is $7, RMB, yuan, call it what you like. The Chinese currency has many different names, but let's call it RMB, 7 RMB to the dollar, and that's a sensitive point. And of course, the point about that is that if China, which is the world's biggest manufacturing exporter, if it reduces the price of the RMB, if it falls below a certain level, Chinese exports become cheaper, and that begins to erode the effect of Trump's tariffs. So Trump reacted angrily and tweeted that China had become a currency manipulator, and the US government has now officially declared China a currency manipulator. And then a few hours later, the RMB reappreciated slightly and is now, I believe, trading at more than less than 7 RMB to the dollar. So the Chinese played a little game. I think that was they tweaked the US with the RMB, but they've also done something else, which is perhaps equally significant. They've said that they're not going to buy any more US agricultural goods, so they're going to stop importing food and soybeans from the US. And they're talking about sending the Chinese fleet to the Persian Gulf with the objective, presumably, of escorting Iranian tankers or Chinese tankers ferrying Iranian oil to China. And there's been reports that the Chinese are still buying Iranian oil. So the Chinese are dropping various signals to the US that they're not going to be pushed around, that the latest moves in the US are not going to impress them. The increase in the tariffs, and that they're preparing their ground carefully to proceed with this divorce, this financial commercial divorce that we are talking about. And I think the shift in the currency, the tweaking of the currency, was the strongest warning of all, because of course if the Chinese currency falls, it will have a devastating effect, not so much on the US actually, but on manufacturers, other manufacturers, especially in the Pacific region, who will be simply priced out by this huge tidal wave of Chinese goods trading at lower prices because the Chinese currency will have been depreciated. And since many of these countries are friends and allies of the US, that was an extremely sensitive thing. And it was a very big warning shot directed by China at the US.
Yeah, this currency war is going to deliver a lot of collateral damage. What do you think are going to be some of the countries that are going to suffer the most if this continues, Alexander? And can you also quickly explain what it means to be labeled a currency manipulator? Does that carry any significant weight to it, or is it just a label?
Right. Let's deal first of all with what would happen if China depreciated its currency. And as I said, we had this avalanche of Chinese goods pouring out of China at much lower prices, relative to the dollar, because the Chinese currency in which they are made will have lost value. The countries that would have been devastated would be countries like Taiwan, Vietnam, perhaps to some extent South Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, but mainly the big manufacturing exporters, as I said, Vietnam, Taiwan, South Korea, and I suspect beyond a certain point, India. India is not a big manufacturing exporter, but it runs a big trade deficit, much of which is with China. And I think if India faced a mass of Chinese goods flooding in at cheaper prices, that would be destabilizing for India. That would be put India under a lot of pressure. The other economy which would be very severely hit by this would be Germany. Germany is, one of the world's big exporters. China is one of its big export markets. The Chinese are already buying fewer German goods. If the Chinese currency falls, those German goods would become more expensive. The Chinese need to buy German goods less than they once did. And increasingly, China is competing with Germany on world export markets. So all these countries would be affected. And to some extent, the US would be affected also, because the US, people always forget this, is also a big manufacturing exporter and a bigger manufacturing importer. But I think the US is a big enough economy to ride something like that out. Vietnam, Taiwan, South Korea, Germany are not, and they would be hurt very badly. And that's why you see world international markets, the world markets, responding so nervously to this move. Now, declaring China a currency manipulator does have a certain legal significance. It means that the United States can impose even more tariffs, penalty tariffs on Chinese goods, because they will be saying that the Chinese are manipulating their currency in order to trade aggressively and to obtain an unfair advantage. But I think the other thing that it can do is it would enable the United States to bring complaints against China to the International Monetary Fund. What would happen if the US did that? Who knows? I doubt very much, actually. And I doubt that calling China a currency manipulator in the end is going to have the huge effect that some people in the United States think it does. The Chinese, I think, would take it very calmly.
Now, has Trump miscalculated Alexander in how he has proceeded with this confrontation with China? Because it seems that outside of China backing down or coming to the negotiation table, they've actually been emboldened, and it seems like they're taking an approach to confront the U.S. head on. I mean, they're not giving anything to Trump. They're, with every move that Trump makes, they're retaliating.
Yes,
with even more drastic moves. So it just seems that this is really not working, is it?
Well, first of all, it depends upon what Donald Trump's end game is. And I think this is a point to make. First of all, and I've said this many times about China, I was writing this on the Duran when we were talking about the Korean crisis, the North Korean crisis, before the summit meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. I was saying that the thing you must never do, the biggest mistake you can make, is to try to bluff China, because China will always call your bluff. It's the culture. The Chinese will never agree to be pushed around. And the other thing to understand about China, and I think this is a thing that a lot of people in the US still find very difficult to understand, is that China today is an immense economy. It can absorb blows which back in the 1990s would have broken it. So the Chinese not only will call any bluff, but they will respond, their economy will respond and adjust to whatever blows the United States hurls at them. I think this view that people have in the US, that China is a house of cards, if they push a bit, it will all come tumbling down, I think that is delusional. And of course, the Chinese, and we've talked about this many times on previous programs, they are now much better prepared for a long a long confrontation with the US than they were just a few years ago, because they've now developed this very close relationship with the Russians. And to the extent that China needs, which it does, to import food, energy, and raw materials, it has now got Russia at its back, who can supply China with all these things in abundance. And the oil and gas pipelines, which are the key to all of this, are going to start operating between Russia and China at the end of this year, with all of that trade being conducted in rubles and RMB. So the Chinese have prepared for this. They're in a stronger position than the US expected, and they call your bluff. But I'm not going to say that Donald Trump has miscalculated. And this is not because I'm a Trump apologist or anything else, anything like that. It's because I think that Donald Trump has a longer term agenda here, which is that I think that Donald Trump deep down is a protectionist. I think he wants to rebuild the US manufacturing base, which I think he feels has been frittered away by previous presidents and previous administrations, and by the people on Wall Street and by the big companies, by relocating in places like China. This is why he's pulling out of all these free trade agreements that the US made for essentially, let's be very clear about this, political or geopolitical reasons in the 1990s and thereafter. He's putting up trade barriers. And I think he calculates to himself, if I have some turbulence in the meantime, well, the US has deep pockets. We can bail out the farmers if they come under some pressure. We can manage any blip in inflation because Chinese goods become more expensive. Our long-term game is to rebuild the US industrial base. There are lots of people like Michael Hudson, the economist, who say he's going about this in the wrong way. And maybe he is, but I don't think that's an unworthy objective. And if he's going to do it, I think he's got to accept, and I think emotionally and intellectually he has accepted, that that means an economic divorce from China and the US withdrawing into itself economically and returning to the kind of economic system that it had up to the 1950s. So, I don't think you can say that this is backfiring on Trump yet. It's creating turbulence. But if you accept my thesis, the thesis which we've discussed in previous programs, that this is a structured economic divorce, I think that's all we're seeing.
Okay, so Trump comes into office with a plan to rebuild U.S. manufacturing.
Yeah.
He is a protectionist at heart, and now he's been 2+ years in office, and he's moving forward on that plan.
Yes.
So my first question is like a two-part question for you. My first question is the Trump administration, and do you think the American people and the American economy is ready for a long rebuilding process? And the second part of my question is the Chinese side. The Chinese side, I agree with you, has been preparing for this before Trump, way before Trump, probably going back to Obama and maybe even before that. And I think a lot of it started perhaps during the sanctions with Russia. And the ironic thing is the sanctions on Russia created this Russian-Chinese alliance. And as Russia was preparing to absorb the blows of sanctions, it seems that the Chinese, in talks with the Russians, said, you know what? We should start preparing to perhaps meet the same fate. So, I mean, it seems that they started preparing way before Trump.
Yeah.
They have, the One Belt, One Road. They're building this Eurasian infrastructure. They're combining their resources, their technical know-how with the Russians. And it seems that China was preparing for this much longer. Do you think the Chinese have a little bit of an advantage here because they had a head start in this war, in this battle of superpowers?
Yes, I think they do. And I think the important thing to understand about China, the big difference between China and the US, is that China has a consistent government. I mean, it may not be a democracy, but the effect of it not being a democracy is that it has in the Politburo and its various things, the Chinese Communist Party and its various institutions, it has a government that is able to plan for the long term.
A continuity.
Continuity. So they're able to look at situations in the around 2014, say to themselves, look, this is where it's all going, and they're able to adjust and prepare for them over a long period of time, and they have the structures within China to do it. I mean, they still plan a great deal. They still have these, they're still able to have long-term plans in a way that the United States, which changes its government every 4 years or every 8 years, it can't do. But I think that there is an even bigger underlying problem. And this is where I come back to what Michael Hudson was talking about, because Michael Hudson's concern is that what Donald Trump is trying to do is impossible. Reindustrialize the core of the United States is impossible, not because the United States doesn't have the technical know-how to do that, but because the structure of the US economy and of US society is such that it is politically and psychologically impossible, that too many manufacturing skills have been lost, but more importantly, that carrying out this dramatic change in economic orientation would go too much against the interests of big US corporations who have making huge profits by downsizing in the US and relocating plant in places like Mexico and India, Vietnam, and up to now China, and they will simply transfer their plants from China to Indonesia rather than bring them back to the United States. And of course, it also works against the interests of the big financial community in Wall Street and elsewhere, which wants a much more open economy so that they can move money around freely, which they would not be able to do in the same way if we move back to a world such as the world which existed up to the 1950s, with protectionist barriers and controlled trade and ultimately controlled currencies. So that's Michael Hudson's argument. I think it is a compelling one. But all I will say about it is this. Firstly, the United States is a very big country. It does have huge technological and industrial and intellectual resources. And I think a large part of the US electorate would support such a program if it was ever put together and implemented consistently. The problem is, in my opinion, and this is where I disagree with Michael Hudson, the problem is not structural, it's political. It requires not just Donald Trump to be re-elected in 2020 and continue these policies for another 4 years. It requires Donald Trump to find people who will carry out these policies in his succeeding administration. And he's had terrible trouble finding people to staff his administration and to do the things he wants. And it also means that when Trump finally goes in, perhaps in 6 years, that whoever takes over from him will continue those policies, because this isn't going to be something that's going to be done in a few years. We're looking at a 10, 20-year program here. Now, once upon a time, the United States could plan for 20 years. I mean, it did in the 30s, right up to the 50s. I mean, the Eisenhower administration was building on many of the things that, the Roosevelt administration did in the 30s. That doesn't seem to me to be how the US works politically anymore. The US political system seems to me so dysfunctional that it's difficult to see this happening over time, the way it used to happen in the United States and the way it happens in China and actually also in Russia. Having said that, I mean, at least Trump is trying. Who else is?
Yeah, Alexandra, that's an excellent point, and I just jotted down. It's going to be very difficult, whether it's his administration or the next administration, to find people who believe in this type of protectionist, rebuilding, manufacturing type of policy, because so many people have been, captured by corporations, and these corporations, most of them, I'm not going to say all of them, but I would venture to guess most of them have no interest in bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. if they can get it for much cheaper, whether it be China or Indonesia or Vietnam or wherever that may be.
Well, it will simply cut their profits, and it will mean that people who run these corporations, the chief executives who run them, will start to be once again accountable to American workers who might not be so willing, and American shareholders who might not be so willing for these people to walk away with the telephone number salaries that these people are collecting. So you have this huge growth of inequality in the United States because the United States hollowed as well. I mean, one reason is because the United States hollowed out its manufacturing base and financialized its economy. There are people who have won from this, and they're very powerful and they're very articulate. They have most of the media supporting them and rooting for them. And of course, the other thing to say is if you look at the economics departments in US universities, they have been completely captured by the followers of these sort of people. So that's what Trump is going against. And can he win out over all of this? Well, the United States has won over many battles. I mean, it's managed to reinvent itself and to adapt to many challenges. And I'm not going to write it off, but this is a huge challenge that Donald Trump is, taking on. But having said that, and I come back to this, I personally believe that he is right. I think the United States does need to carry out a radical restructuring of his economy. And given that I think he is right, I can't say that he is wrong to try doing it. It may be politically difficult for him, but at least he's doing something. I mean, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, those sort of people, they don't even accept that there's a real problem there. So, that's all I think I can say about it.
Yeah, they would just come in and they would just reverse everything that Trump has done. They would just go back to the Obama years.
Well, exactly.
And just, hand everything over to China, here, take it all, and everything would be hunky-dory for them. That would be fine for them.
Exactly.
And that's the problem.
That's the problem. That's exactly where we would be. We would not have any possibility of an industrial revival. In fact, we would have more of the same, with the same, in my opinion. I mean, I appreciate there are other people who have other views, but in my opinion, in the end, resulting in an outcome which for the United States is very bad. But with Trump, at least there's a possibility for a change, remote though that might be, with, as I say, with the likes of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and, frankly, Elizabeth Warren.
They don't want an industrial revival, though, Alexander. They really don't. Obama didn't want one. George Bush didn't want one. The Clintons, Clintons definitely didn't want one. I mean, they're the ones that probably started this whole process of selling America off. I mean, it's...
Well, exactly.
And I think this explains a lot as to why the media goes after Trump so hard. They focus on the racist stuff, the identity politics, but probably, above all of this stuff, this low-level attacks, these low-level attacks that they throw at Trump, I bet you above it all is the fact that the media and these guys are either, part of these large conglomerate corporations. Yes. They're either, a subsidiary of these big corps, or they're owned and they're paid by these corporations, whether it's advertising dollars or actual, corruption and payment. God knows what's going on. But that explains why they're going after Trump, because there's probably, the sense that this guy is going to take away these 10, 20, 30 years of where we have just been, enriching ourselves to immense levels.
Absolutely.
Of course, hollowing out the rest of the country in the meantime.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's exactly. I mean, and sense is the right word. I mean, intellectually, they may not have fully grasped what is happening, and I, sometimes wonder how much of this within Trump's own mind has been clearly thought through. But I think that just as Donald Trump has a sort of visceral grasp of what needs to be done for the United States, and I think another point I'd say about Donald Trump is he cares about the United States. When he talks about making America great again, I mean, I've no doubt about it. He means it. And these other people, again, they may not have thought exactly through all the things that Trump is talking about and doing, but they sense at some level that he is a threat to the political and economic system from which they have benefited so disproportionately. And that's why they oppose him. That's ultimately what it's all about. That's why they are so antagonistic to him. And can I just say something else? It's also why when he goes to these industrial cities and he talks to people from these backgrounds, he talks their language. I'm talking about his own electoral base. That's one reason, again, why they sense that he is ultimately on their side, and why he relates to them so closely. This is what the whole political struggle in the United States is all about, in my opinion. But, will it succeed? That's a huge question. Will China adapt? Of that, I have no doubt.
One final question, Alexander. Do you think that China is aware of all of this? Have they strategized this? Have they game planned this? And they understand that
yes.
This goes for the U.S., this goes far beyond financial and economic issues. There's a lot of political pitfalls and political issues that could derail, the reindustrialization, the revival of industry in the U.S. as they're going up against China. Do you think the Chinese understand all the dangers
absolutely.
that the U.S. has in front of it, that Trump, not even the U.S., that Trump has in front of him as he wages this war?
Yes, absolutely, they do. Can I just say something? I mean, unlike many people who talk about China, I read the English language, obviously, Chinese media every day. And I mean, the Chinese are very, very observant and well informed about what is going on in the United States. And they have a very, very keen grasp of the nature of the political conflict there. Of that, there is no question. Having said that, I don't think that's going to affect the course that they're taking, because I think that at some level also they too understand that China can't continue to develop economically simply by being a massive export machine. They want to develop a more modern, a more sophisticated, a more consumer-based and service economy, and at the same time that means moving away from exports towards services to a greater extent. They won't ever agree to hollow out their industries in the way the US has done, but they will have to balance that by buying raw materials and food from reliable sources, and that's where Russia comes in. So China and Russia are these two complementary economies that are converging with each other and are a perfect fit in so many ways. And we have to start thinking about this in that way. We have to start looking at these two economies as greater Eurasia, because that's what it's becoming. But are they aware that Donald Trump may, what the project that he's working towards may fail in the United States? Of course they are. Absolutely. They are very well aware of what is going on in the United States. I would invite anybody who wants to get a sense of this to go to Global Times, to Xinhua, to the English language edition of the People's Daily, to the South China Morning Post, to all of these places.
All right, Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on that notifications bell to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. And please share this channel outside of YouTube, Minds, Gab, Twitter, Facebook, and you can also find us on BitChute as well. We post all our videos on BitChute, so you can take a look at our channel on that platform. You can also get a copy of this video in audio format as well, so follow us on iTunes and Soundcloud. And please donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. Your donations help keep this channel up and running. And another thing that helps keep this channel up and running is when you go to the Duran shop. Buy some merchandise. That'll really help keep this this channel moving along and help us fight the demonetization and the censorship that YouTube throws at us every now and then. Right, Alexander?
Absolutely, every now and then. And of course, if you go to our shop, you will find that we sell wonderful merchandise, like the shirt I'm wearing now, like this mug I'm drinking from. But you'll also find various books there. You'll find our analysis of Brexit, which, can I just say, was years ahead of everybody else. I mean, we were anticipating the kind of political crisis that we are seeing in Britain now. And you will also find the discussion of Russiagate. You find two books about Russiagate and about the conspiracy that there was against Donald Trump and to install Hillary Clinton, and the way that conspiracy was covered up by launching this bogus Robert Mueller investigation, which Attorney General Barr brought a stop to. And of course, those two books and the Russiagate conspiracy segue directly into the subjects that we were talking about on this program, because of course the people who ran those conspiracies are exactly the people who do not want to see the kind of economic restructuring of the United States that Donald Trump is essentially trying to do. So that's the reason why these people saw Donald Trump as a threat, partly because of Russia, obviously, but partly because he represents a challenge, a direct challenge to the massive corporate deep state financial interests that have had the United States in its grip ever since the 1990s. And if you want to understand what happened on Russiagate, go to those books. And if you want to understand what manufacturing is all about, well, you can buy other nice things from our shop. You can buy fantastic mugs like this.
Good segue.
Yeah, fantastic mugs. This is real manufacturing. So there you go. And it is. I mean, this is absolutely high quality manufacturing. Beautiful porcelain, 15 ounces. This particular mug has the badge of the Alpha Force, which is Russia's elite special forces unit. It's a sweltering, weird, difficult day in London today, so I'm drinking green tea from it, which is very refreshing. Chinese green tea, there we are, so something Chinese. But I'm drinking it from this mug, and it's 15 ounces, and it's a fantastic mug, and we do so many wonderful mugs with double-headed eagles, like the one here on my shirt, mugs with the Russian symbol, mugs with Mr. Lavrov, the world's best foreign minister, amazing mugs. And we do fantastic shirts, like this polo shirt I'm wearing, like the shirt Alex is wearing. That's not a polo shirt, that's a t-shirt, but we do amazing shirts, 100% cotton shirts, incredibly comfortable, perfect for sweltering days. They look great, they feel great, you feel great in them. You can do amazing analysis, like the kind of analysis we've just been doing on this program. You look smart. You can buy lots of other things in our shop, as well as mugs and shirts. You can buy hats. You can buy stickers. You can buy fantastic things. So what's stopping you? Go straight to our shop, help the Duran, help yourself, and Alex will tell you how to do it.
Yeah, just go to the link in the description box down below and pick up some merchandise. It really helps out this channel, and you can get some great quality gear as well. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Till next time, everybody. Take care.